My name is Amanda Lane. In the exact second my father said, "I don't know her," I felt my whole childhood snap into place like a puzzle I'd been forcing to stay blurry. Christmas Eve. Ohio cold pressed against the windows. The living room glowed with gold and white lights like a magazine spread. Karen's tree wasn't decorated, it was curated. Every ornament matched. Every ribbon was tied the same way. A faint, expensive candle scent hung in the air, something labeled winter balsam or frosted cedar, but it didn't smell like Christmas to me. It smelled like a staged version of it. There were people everywhere. Karen's church friends in nice sweaters, her sister's family, neighbors who always found a reason to drop by, kids in matching pajamas taking selfies in front of the tree. Someone had a holiday playlist running on a speaker, the kind with soft piano versions of songs you normally sang loud. And my stepmother floated through it all like a hostess on a mission, smiling too wide, touching shoulders, fixing place cards, adjusting napkins that were already straight. I stood near the entryway with my coat still on, because I didn't feel like I belonged in the room long enough to get comfortable. I was holding a wrapped gift with a neat tag that said, Ray and Karen, because I'd spent years learning to be gracious in spaces where I wasn't wanted. That was the role I'd mastered, the well-behaved daughter who didn't make anyone uncomfortable. Then the knock came. Karen called from the kitchen in that sing-song voice she used when guests were around. "Amanda, honey, can you get that?" It was always honey when there were witnesses. I opened the front door, and the cold air hit my face like a slap. A man stood on the porch in a dark wool coat, clipboard in hand, the kind of serious posture that made you feel like you'd done something wrong just by existing. He didn't smile. "Evening," he said. "I'm looking for Amanda Lane." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like my ribs moved. "Yes," I managed. He glanced down at the folder, then back up. "This is regarding an outstanding balance with North River Financial. We've tried multiple contact attempts. We need to discuss an arrangement tonight." My ears started ringing. I could still hear the music behind me. I could smell ham and cinnamon and whatever Karen had sprayed on the pine cones. A child laughed. Someone clinked a wine glass. The normal world kept spinning while mine tilted. I swallowed. "This is a fraud case," I said carefully. "I didn't open." Behind me, I felt movement, a shadow. Then my father's voice, too casual, like he'd walked into a conversation about football. "What's this?" My dad stepped into view with a paper plate in his hand, cookies stacked like he'd been mid-bite. He wore a sweater Karen had bought him, something tasteful and bland. He looked like a man playing holiday father in a commercial. His smile was already halfway formed, ready to smooth it over. The agent's eyes flicked to him. "Mr. Lane?" My father froze. The smile died in his face the way a light goes out when you pull the plug. "I'm sorry?" Dad tried. The agent flipped a page. "Raymond Lane? We've spoken to you. You said your daughter would handle this." I heard Karen's footsteps before I saw her. She appeared behind my father, sliding into place like she'd been waiting. Her expression didn't show surprise, it showed calculation. "Excuse me," she said sharply, stepping toward the doorway. "You can't just show up at someone's home on Christmas Eve." The agent stayed calm. "Ma'am, this address is on file." Karen's eyes narrowed, and for half a second, her perfect hostess mask cracked. Then she smiled, small, controlled. "There's been a mistake," she said, like she could say a mistake into existence and make it true. I looked at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He shifted his weight, gripping the paper plate tighter, knuckles pale. And then he did the thing I never thought he would do. Not in public, not in front of people, Not when the truth was standing on our porch with paperwork. He lifted his chin, looked at the agent, and said, loud enough for the living room to hear, "I don't know who that is." My breath caught. The agent blinked. "Sir?" My father pointed at me, at my face, at the daughter he'd tucked into bed when I was 5, at the kid he'd brought to 4th of July fireworks, at the teenager he'd hugged at graduation. He pointed like I was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. "I don't know her," he repeated. She's not my daughter." The music behind us kept playing, soft and wrong. The living room went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when everyone senses a car crash, but no one wants to look. Karen didn't gasp. She didn't ask what he was doing. She leaned in slightly, like she approved. And that's when the worst thought slid into my mind, cold and clean. He isn't panicking. He's following a plan. I felt my throat tighten, but my voice came out steady, almost calm, because something in me had finally reached its limit. "That's interesting," I said, staring at my father, "because you knew me well enough to use my social security number." Karen's head snapped toward me, eyes sharp as glass. My father's face flushed red, then pale. "Amanda," he hissed under his breath, warning me. Not pleading, warning. And suddenly, my entire life lined up behind this moment like dominoes. Every time Karen asked a question that didn't feel like a question. Every time my dad avoided looking me in the eye when money came up. Every time they made me feel guilty for having stability, as if my adulthood was something I owed them rent for. I looked at the agent. "I have documentation," I said. "This is identity theft. I'm disputing the accounts. I've reported it." The agent's expression changed, less businesslike, more wary. "Ma'am, do you know who did it?" I swallowed hard and said the truth out loud for the first time with witnesses listening. "Yes," I said. "My father did." Karen stepped forward fast, voice rising, polished rage wrapped in a smile. "That is enough. You are not going to create a scene in my home." "Your home," I repeated softly, because that phrase had always mattered to her more than anything else. "Right." My father finally looked at me then, and his eyes weren't sad. They were angry, like I was disobeying a rule he'd never even told me I was under. "Stop," he snapped. "Not tonight. Don't do this tonight." I stared at him. "You did this when you signed my name," I said. "Tonight is just when it showed up." Karen's voice went quieter, sharper. "Amanda, you're upset, but you're being irrational. We can talk about this later, privately." Privately, where there were no witnesses, where she could control the narrative, where my father could pretend I was emotional and confused and overreacting. I suddenly understood why Karen hosted Christmas Eve. It wasn't for family. It was for the stage, the image, the proof that her life was perfect. And I realized something else, too. If she cared about appearances this much, she'd never let my father admit the truth in front of these people, which meant she'd been planning for this. She'd been preparing him. I turned back to the agent, forcing myself to breathe. "I'm going to provide you with the case number," I said, "and the lender will receive all documentation through certified mail." The agent nodded slowly. "I'll note that." Karen's smile flickered, and the first real anger came through. "You're unbelievable," she muttered. "This is what your mother did too. Always making problems instead of solving them." My spine stiffened. My mother had left, yes, but she hadn't done this. Karen was the kind of woman who used the absence of someone to rewrite them. My father stepped closer to me, voice low. Amanda, drop it. You're embarrassing yourself. I looked up at him. No, I said. I'm embarrassing you. That was when the silence behind us fully landed. I could feel everyone in the living room leaning closer, like they were listening through the walls. Someone had lowered the music. A kid had stopped laughing. A chair creaked. My aunt from Karen's side, some woman with perfect hair I barely knew, appeared at the edge of the hallway, eyes wide. Is everything okay? Karen turned instantly, performing again. Everything's fine, she chirped. Just a misunderstanding. My father tried to breathe life back into the lie, his old habit. Yeah, he said too loud. It's nothing. But my eyes stayed on him, because I wasn't a misunderstanding. I was his daughter, and he was denying me to protect himself. I stepped back from the doorway just enough to let the cold air spill into the entryway. I'm leaving, I said. Karen's head jerked toward me. Good, she snapped, mask slipping. If you can't behave like family, then don't come in here poisoning the mood. My father didn't stop her. He didn't say, that's my daughter. He didn't say, Karen, stop. He didn't say anything that sounded like a parent. He just stood there, with his plate of cookies, like a man who wanted this whole moment to disappear. And that's when the thought came again, stronger. This isn't new. This is simply the first time he did it, where everyone could see. I walked out into the snow without saying goodbye to anyone. My hands shook as I got into my car, but my face stayed dry. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I'd been hurt by them for so long that my body had learned to hold it in until it was safe. I drove away while their Christmas lights blurred behind me, and the only thing I could hear clearly was my father's sentence echoing in my head like a bell. I don't know her. 2 weeks earlier, if someone had told me Christmas would end with my father denying me at the front door, I would have laughed. Because even after everything, I still believed there was a line he wouldn't cross. I still believed biology meant something. I was wrong. My mother left when I was 10, and people love to turn that into a simple story. They love to say she abandoned us. They love to say she was selfish. But the truth is complicated. My mom didn't leave because she didn't love me. She left because my father was drowning, and he kept pulling her under with him. I remember the last month before she went, not as one clear memory, but as flashes. Her standing at the kitchen counter late at night, opening mail with trembling hands. My father's voice rising, "Why are you acting like I did something wrong?" The sound of a drawer slamming. My mom sitting on the edge of my bed later, smoothing my hair back, whispering, "It's not your job to fix adults." I didn't understand then. I understand now. After she left, my father became a man who needed someone else to steer him. He didn't like being alone with his choices. He didn't like silence. He didn't like accountability. Karen showed up like an answer. She worked at a bank branch back then, the kind of job that gave her a polished voice and a habit of speaking like rules were personally invented by her. She wore crisp blouses and smelled like lotion. She smiled with her teeth. She was good at making my father feel like a man again, and she was even better at making herself look like a savior. She needs structure, Karen would say about me, like I was a messy room. She needs consistency. My father nodded along, grateful that someone else was taking over. At first, Karen's control felt like stability. She made dinner at the same time every night. She kept the fridge stocked. She labeled shelves. She bought matching towels. But the longer she stayed, the more it became clear. Her order wasn't about caring. It was about power. She decided where my things went. She decided what stories about my mother were appropriate. She decided who got photographed at holidays. She decided whose opinions mattered. And slowly, subtly, she decided I was a leftover piece of my father's previous life, an inconvenience she had to manage until she didn't. By the time I was in high school, Karen had mastered a certain tone with me, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. "You're so mature," she'd say when I did chores without being asked, meaning, don't expect praise. "You're so independent," she'd say when I stopped asking for rides, meaning, good, need less from us. "You're lucky your father and I keep things together," she'd say when bills were paid, meaning, you owe us. And my father let her talk, because letting her talk meant he didn't have to. I got out as soon as I could. College, scholarships, jobs. I built a life that didn't depend on anyone. I learned the American religion of self-sufficiency because I didn't have a choice. And for years, I kept my father at arm's length. Phone calls on Sundays, holiday visits that I could leave early, small gifts, small talk. I thought I was managing it. But families like mine don't stop wanting what you have. They just wait until you have more. And I had something Karen understood better than most people. I had a clean credit history, a solid score, a name that looked safe on paper. If you've never had your identity used against you, you might not understand how violating it feels. It isn't like someone stole your wallet. You can cancel a card. You can replace cash. Identity theft feels like someone wore your skin. They sign your name. They borrow your future. They make decisions that will haunt you while they sleep fine at night. And the sickest part is how normal it looks from the outside. A loan application is just paperwork. A credit card is just a number. But behind every one of those accounts is a person who has to live with the consequences. Me. The first time I noticed something off wasn't even a loan. It was an email from a department store I'd never shopped at. "Thanks for opening your new account." I deleted it, assuming it was spam. Then a week later, another email, another welcome. And then my credit monitoring app pinged. New inquiry, new account. I sat on my couch in Columbus, staring at my phone, and felt the familiar instinct rise. Minimize it, rationalize it, don't cause drama. Because that's how I was trained. In my family, the person who points out the fire is always blamed for ruining the mood. But the numbers didn't lie. So I did what I always do when I'm scared. I got organized. I pulled all 3 credit reports. I highlighted anything I didn't recognize. I wrote down dates, lenders, balances, addresses. I created a folder called Fraud on my desktop and started saving everything. And there it was, repeated like a stamp. Their address. My father's house, the place Karen called our home. A place I hadn't lived in more than a decade. I told myself, maybe my father did it out of desperation. Then I remembered Karen's voice, the way she talked about money like a tool. I remembered one Thanksgiving when she'd poured herself a glass of wine and said, casually, "You know, Amanda, people with good credit can make a lot of things happen." At the time, I'd laughed politely. Now that sentence sounded like a blueprint. I called my father the next morning. He answered after the 3rd ring, voice sleepy. "Mandy, what's wrong?" "Did you open any accounts in my name?" I asked. Silence. Then a long, slow exhale. "It's complicated," he muttered. My chest tightened. "Say yes or no." It was just for a little while, he said. Karen, don't, I cut in. Don't blame her. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard the truth. He wasn't going to protect me. He was going to protect the person standing next to him in bed. Karen said, he started again, voice defensive now, that you have a strong credit score. She said it wouldn't hurt you. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. You used my social security number. I didn't want to, he snapped. We had bills. Things were tight. Then you ask me, I said. You don't steal my identity. It's not stealing, he insisted, like he could rename it into innocence. You're my daughter. That was the first time I realized how they justified it. They didn't see me as a person with rights. They saw me as a resource with a title. Daughter, stepdaughter, family. Labels that let them take without guilt. I need you to fix it, I said. Call the lenders, close the accounts, make payments, admit it. He went quiet. Then, softer, almost pleading. Let me handle it. Please, don't make this a big thing. Don't make this a big thing. In other words, keep absorbing the damage so I don't have to. I hung up without agreeing, and that day, Karen texted me for the first time in months. Not, hi, Amanda. Not, are you okay? Just a clean, cold sentence. Your father is stressed. Don't attack him during the holidays. Attack. That word made my stomach turn. As if accountability was violence. As if what they did to me was just a misunderstanding I should politely swallow. I stared at the screen and felt something inside me harden. Because the truth was simple. They weren't scared of my feelings. They were scared of consequences. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, paperwork spread out, and I did the thing I'd avoided doing for years. I told myself the truth out loud. My father and his wife are using my credit. It sounded ugly. It sounded like something that happened to other people. It sounded like the kind of story you read on the internet and think, no way. And yet, the evidence sat right in front of me like a stack of bricks. I opened a new document and typed a list titled, What They Have, What I Have. They have Social Security number, full legal name, date of birth, childhood address, confidence that I won't cause drama. I have documentation, Reddit reports, stamped alerts, needless ability to file a report. I stared at the last one for a long time, because filing a report meant war. It meant my family would turn on me. It meant Karen would call me ungrateful. It meant my father would play victim. And in my bones, I could already hear the familiar chorus. Why would you do this to your father? It's Christmas. Families make mistakes. Be the bigger person. But I also knew something else. If I didn't stop it now, it would keep happening. And the longer it went, the harder it would be to undo. So I took a breath, opened my credit bureau accounts, and froze my credit. It felt like locking a door after years of leaving it open because you hoped thieves would suddenly grow a conscience. Then I started drafting dispute letters, one to each lender, certified mail, clear language. I did not authorize this account. I am a victim of identity theft. I paused before typing the next sentence, because the next sentence was the one that changed everything. I believe the perpetrator is a family member. I didn't type the name yet, not yet, because part of me still wanted to believe my father would wake up and fix it himself. That part of me was still living in the past. The part of me that wanted to be a good daughter at any cost. And that was the part Karen had been counting on. When Christmas Eve arrived, I told myself I'd keep it calm. I told myself I'd be polite, show up, exchange gifts, and leave early. I told myself I could endure a few hours for the sake of peace. But peace with predators is never peace. It's just quiet compliance. And that night at the door, when my father denied me like I was nothing, I finally saw exactly what Karen had built. She hadn't just married my father. She had trained him. Trained him to protect her comfort first. Trained him to see me as a problem when I demanded basic respect. Trained him to use my stability as a lifeline, then cut me loose when the bill arrived. And as I drove away into the cold Ohio night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, one thought kept repeating with a clarity that hurt. If they can erase me this easily in public, they have been erasing me in private for years. And I wasn't going to let them do it anymore. Part 2. After Christmas Eve, the house went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No angry calls, no apologies, no explanations. Just silence. For 3 days, my phone didn't ring once. Not from my father, not from Karen, not from any relative who had been in that living room pretending not to hear what happened. It was like they'd all agreed, without saying it out loud, that if they ignored me long enough, I'd fold. That had always been the pattern. I'd push back, they'd wait, and eventually I'd cave, apologize for how things came out, and absorb the damage so everyone else could feel normal again. But this time, something was different. This time, there were numbers attached. Balances, interest rates, due dates. You can gaslight emotions. You can't gaslight a credit report. On December 27th, I took a personal day from work. Not because I was sick, but because I needed a full, uninterrupted day to look at the truth without softening it for anyone else. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled everything up again, slowly, carefully, like I was assembling evidence in a case file. North River Financial, personal loan, opened 8 months earlier. Balance just under $9,000. Payments made for 3 months, then nothing. A National Furniture Store card, used to buy a sectional, a dining table, and something labeled Home Decor Bundle. Karen's taste, if I had to guess. A gas card tied to a regional chain near their house. Weekly fill-ups. Consistent. Thoughtless. Another personal loan, smaller but newer, opened less than 2 weeks before Christmas. All of it under my name. All of it under their address. And suddenly, Christmas Eve made sense in a way that turned my stomach. The timing wasn't accidental. They hadn't been caught off guard. They'd been exposed. Karen had known this was coming. She'd known the accounts were past due. She'd known collectors were escalating. She'd known someone would show up eventually. And instead of fixing it, she'd prepared an exit strategy. Erase me. If my father denied knowing me, if I was just some woman causing a scene, then maybe, just maybe, she could delay consequences a little longer. That realization made something settle in my chest. Cold, heavy, clear. This wasn't desperation. This was management. On the 4th day, my father finally called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Amanda, it's Dad. Karen's really upset about what happened. We need to talk like adults. This is getting blown out of proportion." Blown out of proportion. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say I shouldn't have done this. He didn't say I denied you. He said Karen's upset. I listened to the voicemail twice, then deleted it. Not because I was angry, because I didn't want to memorize the sound of him choosing her again. Instead, I called the credit bureaus. I placed extended fraud alerts. I locked everything down. I changed every security question to answers no one in my family would ever guess. Then I called a non-emergency police line. My voice shook when I explained the situation, but the officer on the other end didn't sound surprised. "You'd be shocked how often this happens," he said calmly. "Family identity theft is more common than strangers." I closed my eyes. "So what do I do?" I asked. "We'll start a report," he said. "You'll need documentation, and you'll need to name the person you believe is responsible." That last part hung in the air between us. Name the person. For years, my father had been a concept to me more than a man, a role, a responsibility, a source of guilt. Now he was about to become something else, a suspect. "I understand," I said. We scheduled an in-person appointment for the following week. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. Because once I did this, there was no going back to polite denial. Karen texted me that night, longer this time. "You really crossed a line. Your father hasn't slept. You embarrassed him in front of people who care about us. I don't know what kind of resentment you're holding on to, but this is not how family handles conflict." I read it twice, then once more, slower, and I realized something important. She never denied it. She never said, "We didn't open those accounts." She never said, "This is a mistake." She went straight to tone policing, straight to guilt, straight to control. I typed back one sentence. "You used my identity. This is not a family conflict, it's a crime." The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a reply came through. "You're going to regret doing this." I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. I didn't reply, because regret was something I'd already lived with for years, quietly, privately, while covering for other people's mistakes. If regret was the price of stopping, I'd pay it. Over the next week, the pressure campaign began. It didn't come from Karen directly. She was smarter than that. It came through the family. An aunt I barely spoke to left a voicemail saying, "Your dad's always been fragile. You know that." A cousin messaged me, "Karen's not perfect, but you didn't have to humiliate them." Even my mother, who had left years ago, called with a careful tone. "I support you," she said slowly, "but are you sure you want to go this far?" I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the same wood grain I'd been staring at for days. "Mom," I asked quietly, "did he ever use your name?" There was a pause, then a sigh that sounded older than it should have. "Yes," she admitted. "Once. I caught it early. That's when I knew I had to leave." The room went very still, not because of what she said, but because of what it confirmed. This wasn't new. I wasn't special. I was simply the next available name with good credit. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I thought you were safe," she said. "I thought distance would protect you." "So did I replied. We sat in silence for a moment, the truth hanging between us. Then my mother said something that surprised me. "I'm proud of you for not absorbing it," she said. "I wish I'd been able to do that sooner." That was the first time anyone said proud instead of concerned, and it mattered more than I expected. At work, I told my manager I was dealing with a personal legal issue. She didn't pry. She just nodded and said, "Take what you need." I realized how different that felt, from being supported instead of exploited. During lunch breaks, I researched family identity theft cases. I read forums. I read legal articles. I learned that what my father and Karen did wasn't a gray area. It was textbook. Unauthorized use of personal identifying information, fraudulent financial gain, willful concealment. And the more I read, the more one pattern stood out. In almost every case, the victim hesitated. Not because they lacked evidence, but because they loved the person who hurt them. That hesitation was the real damage. The police appointment came faster than I expected. I brought a binder, printed credit reports, account statements, text messages, addresses highlighted in yellow. The officer flipped through everything quietly. "Do you recognize this address?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That's my father's house." "Do you recognize these purchases?" "Yes." "Did you authorize any of this?" "No." He nodded, wrote something down, then looked at me directly. "Ms. Lane," he said, "are you prepared for this to move forward if the evidence supports charges?" I thought of Christmas Eve, of my father pointing at me, of Karen's satisfied silence. "Yes," I said. He wrote down my father's name, and suddenly, it was real. That evening, my father called again. This time, I answered. "Amanda," he said immediately, voice tight. "Why are the police calling me?" I leaned back against the counter, steadying myself. "Because you used my identity," I said, "and I reported it." "You didn't have to do that," he snapped. "We could have handled this internally." "Internally?" I repeated. "You denied knowing me at the door." He went quiet, then defensive. "Karen panicked," he said. "She didn't mean it like that." "And you?" I asked. "What did you mean?" Silence. "I did what my wife thought was best," he said finally. There it was again, the sentence that explained everything. I closed my eyes. "Then you can let your wife help you deal with the consequences," I replied. He raised his voice. "You're blowing up your own family." "No," I said calmly. "I'm refusing to be collateral." He cursed under his breath. "You're heartless," he said, "after everything I did for you." I almost laughed, because that line, "after everything I did for you," was the final illusion cracking. Love doesn't come with invoices. "I'm done," I said. "Don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer." I hung up, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, my hands didn't shake afterward. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off except for the small tree by the window. I watched cars pass on the street below and thought about how quiet my life suddenly felt. Not empty, clear. The noise, the guilt, the obligation, the constant emotional debt had finally stopped screaming. And in that quiet, one thought became unavoidable. Karen didn't just push my father to use my credit. She revealed who he was willing to be when it mattered, and I was finally done protecting that illusion. Part 3. Once the police report existed, the story stopped belonging to my family. It belonged to the system, and that terrified them. The first official letter arrived in my mailbox on a gray January morning, the kind where Ohio skies look like they're pressing down on everything. It was from North River Financial's fraud department, confirming receipt of my affidavit and informing me that the account had been frozen pending investigation. I sat at my kitchen table, letter in hand, and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not joy, not satisfaction. Relief that someone, somewhere, had finally written down the truth. That my name was no longer just floating inside my family's version of events, bent, minimized, rewritten, but fixed in black ink on official paper. I scanned the letter, uploaded it to my folder, and sent copies to the other lenders. By the end of that week, 3 accounts were frozen. 2 more followed shortly after. Each confirmation email felt like a brick being lifted off my chest. And with every brick that moved, the pressure from my family increased. Karen didn't call me directly anymore. She didn't have to. She used proxies. My father's sister left a voicemail so long I had to listen to it in parts. "This has gone too far," she said. "Karen's beside herself. Your dad's health isn't great. You know he's always been weak with money. You're punishing him for being human." I replayed that sentence later. Punishing him for being human. As if stealing my identity was a personality quirk. As if my credit score was a shared family resource like a spare bedroom. I didn't return the call. Instead, I forwarded the voicemail to my fraud folder. Because I'd learned something important by then. Anything said casually in defense of wrongdoing becomes evidence when you stop protecting people. Karen sent a letter next. Not an email, a physical letter. She'd chosen cream-colored stationery with gold trim, the kind meant to look formal and dignified. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who wanted every word to look reasonable. She wrote about family. She wrote about forgiveness. She wrote about how misunderstandings escalate when emotions take over. She never wrote the word identity. She never wrote the word credit. She never wrote the word illegal. Instead, she framed it as a misunderstanding between generations. She ended the letter with a sentence that made my jaw tighten. "Dragging law enforcement into private family matters has consequences you may not fully understand yet." I folded the letter carefully. Then I scanned it. Then I added it to the folder. Because threats dressed up as concern are still threats. And this time, I wasn't pretending otherwise. 2 weeks later, the detective assigned to my case called me back. "Ms. Lane," he said, "we've reviewed the documentation. We've also spoken with the lenders." My stomach clenched. "And?" I asked. "There's enough evidence to proceed," he said. "We're referring the case to the county prosecutor." I stared at the wall across from me, where a faint shadow from the window frame cut the paint into uneven rectangles. Proceed. That word carried weight. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means your father may be charged," he said carefully. "Likely with fraud-related offenses. It also means he'll have an opportunity to respond through counsel. Through counsel. Not through denial. Not through charm. Not through pointing at me and pretending I didn't exist. This time, there would be records." I thanked the detective and hung up. Then I sat there for a long time, hands folded in my lap, letting the reality settle. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. And those two things only look the same to people who've never faced consequences before. The first call from my father after that came late at night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was hoarse, tired, stripped of the confidence I'd grown up hearing. "Amanda, I don't know what Karen told you, but this has gone way too far. The police, lawyers, this is serious. You need to call me." I deleted it. The second voicemail came the next morning. "I'm not a criminal," he said, anger creeping back in. "I made mistakes. Families make mistakes. You're acting like I'm some stranger." That one I saved, because denial is useful evidence. The third voicemail came that afternoon, And that one finally broke the illusion completely. "Karen says if you don't withdraw the complaint," he said quietly, "this will ruin everything." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I hurt you." Not, "I shouldn't have done this." Just, "Karen says." That was when I stopped feeling torn, because the choice had already been made, just not by me. When the prosecutor's office contacted me, they asked if I'd be willing to provide a formal victim statement. I said yes. They sent me guidelines, clear, structured, cold. Stick to facts. Describe impact. Avoid speculation. I sat down that night and started writing, not emotionally, precisely. I wrote about the accounts, the balances, the dates, the addresses. I wrote about the sleepless nights, the panic every time my phone buzzed, the fear that my career, built carefully, quietly, could be derailed by someone else's decisions. I wrote about Christmas Eve, about standing at the door while my father denied knowing me, about my stepmother's silence, about how public humiliation doesn't feel dramatic. It feels surgical. When I finished, I read it back once. Then I sent it. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to soften the truth to be believed. The family backlash reached its peak after that. Group texts lit up. Accusations flew. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions about my character. "You've always been cold," one cousin wrote. "You think you're better than us," another said. I didn't reply, because arguing with people who benefit from your silence only teaches them how much they can get away with. Karen tried one last tactic. She showed up at my workplace. Not inside, outside. She waited in the parking lot near the end of my workday, standing beside her SUV like she'd just happened to be there. I almost drove past her. Almost. But then I thought about all the years I'd driven past discomfort, past red flags, past my own instincts. So I parked. I stepped out of my car, and I walked toward her. "Amanda," she said quickly, voice soft, concerned. "I just wanted to talk." "This isn't appropriate," I replied. She smiled tightly. "I know you're angry, but you need to understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "Your father is weak," she said. "He doesn't handle pressure well. If this goes forward, he could lose everything." I met her eyes. "You already used me to protect him," I said. "That option is gone." Her expression hardened. "You're being selfish," she snapped. "You've always been selfish. You got out. You got stable. And instead of helping, you turned your back." I felt a strange calm settle over me. "No," I said. "I stopped letting you borrow my life." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she had no script. "You think the law will fix this?" she said bitterly. "Families survive by compromise." "Families survive by honesty," I replied, "and this one didn't." I walked past her without another word. She didn't follow. The plea deal came faster than I expected. My father's lawyer contacted the prosecutor. He would plead guilty to reduced charges, restitution, probation, mandatory financial counseling. No jail time. When I heard the terms, I didn't feel cheated. I felt done. The goal had never been punishment. It had been protection. And now, legally, he could no longer open accounts under my name without immediate consequences. That mattered more than any sentence. The court date arrived in early spring. I didn't attend. Instead, I went to work, sat in meetings, answered emails, and let the process unfold without me sitting in a room watching my father avoid my eyes. When the prosecutor called afterward to confirm the outcome, I thanked her and hung up. Then I went to the bathroom and cried. Not because he'd been charged, but because the man I needed him to be had never existed. And accepting that loss, fully, finally, hurt more than I'd expected. That night, I took a long walk through my neighborhood. Trees were starting to bud. The air smelled like wet earth and possibility. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I noticed something simple. My shoulders weren't tense. My phone wasn't clenched in my hand. I wasn't bracing for the next demand. Justice doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels quiet. And that quiet was something I hadn't known how to live with yet. But I was learning. Part 4. The restitution payments started small. $50, then $100, then another $50. They landed in a separate account the prosecutor's office required me to open, an account I checked once a month, not because I needed the money, but because it reminded me that the story now had structure, rules, oversight. My father no longer got to handle things his way. He had deadlines. He had reporting requirements. He had consequences. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for managing them. At first, I thought that would feel strange. Instead, it felt like relief settling into my bones. The credit bureaus removed the fraudulent accounts one by one. Each confirmation letter felt like a stitch closing something that had been torn open. My score climbed back slowly, not instantly, not magically, but steadily. I learned to appreciate that pace. Fast fixes had always belonged to my father. Real recovery took time. At work, I stopped apologizing for things that weren't my fault. I noticed how often I'd say sorry when asking for basic things, time off, clarity, help. I practiced replacing it with thank you instead. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for explaining. Thank you for the flexibility. It changed how people responded to me. It changed how I responded to myself. Karen disappeared from my life completely. No texts, no letters, no surprise appearances. At first, I waited for the other shoe to drop, for some final confrontation, some dramatic attempt to rewrite the ending. It never came. And that told me everything I needed to know. Karen had never wanted me. She wanted access. Once access was gone, I became irrelevant. That realization didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It clarified. My father tried once more. A letter arrived in late spring, handwritten, uneven, like he was rushing. He wrote about regret. He wrote about stress. He wrote about how things got out of hand. He wrote about missing me. But even then, even in ink, he never wrote the one sentence that mattered. I chose wrong. So I didn't respond. Because reconciliation requires accountability, not nostalgia. I started therapy that summer, not because I was broken, because I was tired of carrying patterns that weren't mine to begin with. I learned words for things I'd lived with my entire life. Parentification, financial abuse, conditional love. I learned that being the strong one often just means you were never allowed to be weak. And I learned that boundaries don't need permission to exist. They just need enforcement. That December, I decorated my own place for Christmas. Not perfectly, not curated. I bought a real tree that shed needles everywhere. I hung mismatched ornaments, some from childhood, some from thrift stores, some from trips I'd taken alone. I invited friends instead of relatives, People who brought wine without expectations. People who helped clean up without keeping score. People who laughed without needing control. We cooked together. We burned the rolls. We played music too loud. And when midnight came, I realized something quietly, without drama or fireworks. This was the first Christmas of my life that felt honest. No pretending, no bracing, no silent negotiations. Just peace. I don't tell people this story often, not because I'm ashamed, but because not everyone earns access to your truth. When I do tell it, people usually ask the same question. Do you forgive him? I've thought about that a lot. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a single decision. It's a boundary with memory. I don't hate my father, but I no longer confuse love with sacrifice. I don't need him to suffer. I need him to stop harming me. And he has, because I made him. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, the fixer, the reliable one, the person whose stability became someone else's safety net, here's what I want you to know. You are not required to finance someone else's dysfunction. You are not obligated to absorb damage to preserve appearances. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't walking away in silence. It's standing still, telling the truth, and letting consequences land where they belong. My name is Amanda Lane, and for the first time in my life, my name belongs only to me. Not as collateral, not as leverage, not as an excuse. Just mine. And that has changed everything, quietly, permanently, and for the better.